Hi, this is Robin Hood of Sherwood Forest by Ann McGovern, Chapter 5, How the Sheriff Comes to Sherwood Forest. The next morning, Robin Hood slept overlong, since he was used to being awakened by the sweet birds in Sherwood Forest. But thoughts of the great prank he would play upon his enemy this fine day caused him to leap from his pallet. For the last time he dressed in his butcher clothes, and whistling a merry tune, went down to breakfast in the great hall. "Ho, my sweet man of meat," cried the sheriff in greeting. "Sit thee down to feast on fresh kidneys and ale, though they are not their usual best. My cook was not in the kitchen this morning, which puzzles me, and my steward lies abed, groaning." Robin tried to hide the smile on his lips while the sheriff continued. "But thou needst not concern thyself with matters of my household. Let us be off to see thy herd of horned beasts. Thou hast not forgotten thy promise to sell." "My memory is as sharp as the sword you carry, good sheriff," said Robin Hood. "I remember it as well as I remember thy promise of 300 gold coins in payment. It has been counted thrice, and I have just sent for 5 stout men to guard us along the way to where thy cattle graze. Truly, we will be safe with such men as Reynold Greenleaf by our side." Robin nearly choked when he heard that name, and he said quickly, "Let us not tarry a moment longer. The sun will soon be high. As for thy guards, there is no need where I take thee." "But hold," cried the sheriff, giving voice to his inmost fear. "Thy lands lie near the greenwood home of that villain Robin Hood. What if the rogue should rob us both?" "Fear not," Robin Hood said, "for that outlaw hath promised me safe passage through his country, in return for a favor I once did him. Let us begin our journey forthwith, so that thou mayst get thy herd home by nightfall." Greed overcame fear, and the sheriff called for his swiftest horse to be made ready. So they left the great house, the sheriff riding and Robin running alongside. And on the way, Robin passed the time by recounting this story and that, about how Robin Hood had robbed the rich and gave to the poor. The very tales that delighted Robin made the sheriff grow pale under his beard. By and by, the two were deep in the forest glade. The more they traveled, the more fearful the sheriff became. He peered right and left into the shadowy thicket, and listened hard for any sudden snapping of a twig that would mean the outlaws were nigh. Of a sudden, Robin Hood led the way to a narrow path. Then cried the sheriff, "Where art thou taking me?" But Robin merely laughed and said, "Why, good sheriff, dost thou have so little trust in me? I and my brothers keep the cattle yonder," and he pointed to a sunlit clearing, where stood several dozen of the king's deer peacefully grazing. "What thou seest here is only a portion of my herd," said Robin. "How dost thou like my horned beasts?" The sheriff, now knowing that a trick had been played upon him, drew rein sharply and cried out, "Vile butcher, I no longer care to see thy herd. The bargain is off. Go thy way, and I will go mine." At this, Robin gave a gleeful laugh and held fast to the sheriff's bridle rein. "No, no, good sheriff, a bargain is a bargain. Prithee, stay a while, for I would have thee meet my brothers." Whereupon he drew forth from under his butcher's apron the silver bugle horn, and blew 3 clear blasts. The deer scattered in all directions as the echoing notes brought a score of men running, all dressed in Lincoln green, with Little John in the lead. "How now, Sheriff?" said Little John. "Thou must miss me sorely to come all this way just to gaze upon my face." At the sight of the man he knew as Reynold Greenleaf, the sheriff flew into such a rage that he sputtered and stammered. "'Tis thine own fault that I left thy service," Little John said. "I was nigh starved at thy house, and thy pay does not compare with what this good master gives." Doffing his cap, he bowed before Robin Hood. Then the sheriff turned to Robin Hood. "Thou hast lied to me, villain," he said, "for thou didst swear we would be in no danger." Robin replied, "Aye, that is so. Truly, thou art in no danger in these glades, for I know these men well, and call them brothers, just as they call me Robin Hood." The sheriff spoke not another word, for fear had made his tongue silent. "Oh, good sheriff," Robin laughed, "this is no day for gloom. Thou hast feasted me in thy house, and now in the greenwood I mean to show thee our favors." Then Little John laid a blindfold across the sheriff's eyes, and taking his bridle rein in hand, led the sheriff down this path and that, till they came to where the tall oak stood. Already bright fires were crackling, and good smells of roasting venison filled the greenwood. "While thy dinner cooks, good sheriff," Robin said, taking off the man's blindfold, "let us have entertainment in thine honor." Though he had been sorely afraid, the sheriff now began to take heart, since none had spoken of the coins that clinked in his purse. And as he watched the merry games that took place before his eyes, he began to enjoy his stay, forgetting for the moment where he was. He saw archers who loosed their gray goose shafts and pierced willow wands at 90 paces. He saw merry men playing at quarterstaff with such strokes and parries that he cried out, "Well struck, fellows!" He saw wrestlers who could have cracked the backbone of Eric of Lincoln, and men who outran the king's deer and pulled them down by their horns. After each man in Robin's band had taken his turn, Robin turned to the sheriff and said, "Dost think ye can draw an arrow with any here? If ye can, then shall we give thee thy feast for naught. But if you fail, you shall take a buffet from Little John, or, as you are wont to call him, Reynold Greenleaf." At Robin's words the sheriff trembled, for today he had seen such bold men as put the king's own to shame at the tourneys. He looked around him and spied a small page who seemed no taller than a newborn fawn. Thereupon he said, "Here is the one I will shoot with." Robin laughed and said to the youth, "Make a mark for thyself and the good sheriff." So the lad placed a garland of flowers some 80 yards distant. "Surely thou jest," said the sheriff, for he thought the boy a mere stripling. "Thou canst not send thine arrows half that distance, much less hit the mark." Robin never said a word, but handed the sheriff his finest bow and shaft. Although the sheriff shot fairly, nowhere did he come to the mark. "Come, lad," laughed Robin Hood, "show our guest what life in the greenwood has taught thee." The boy, who stood barely as high as the sheriff's chest, drew back his bow and sent as pretty a shot as the sheriff ever saw, straight to the mark. Then he loosed another shaft, and sent it spinning so that it splintered the first. Then the sheriff could not help but wonder if he would leave the forest with his life as well as his purse. "Hold," Robin cried to Little John, who was approaching to give the sheriff his due. "There is another here who would welcome this chance above all others." Thereupon he gave a signal, and up ran the cook. Then did the sheriff cry in rage, "Thou good-for-nothing varlet, thou villain! I will see thee hanged if thou art not back in Nottingham this night." Laughing, the cook said, "I'd as soon see myself hanged as spend one more night in thy service. Here's payment for the years I've spent with thee." And he fetched the sheriff such a clout that down he went to the ground, and did not stir till Little John aroused him with a dash of ale in his face. "Nay," cried Robin Hood, "is that a fair way to treat our guest? Up, good sheriff! The cloth is spread upon the green grass, and a feast of sweet venison, rich brown pasties, and the finest English ale await thee." Then, when the sheriff saw that he was served with his own silver plates, he was almost beside himself with rage. But when Robin called forth his best musician, who made much sweet music, the sheriff ate as heartily as Robin's own men. As the day grew shorter, so his hopes grew stronger that he would escape with his purse untouched. When the moon was high, the sheriff rose and said, "I thank thee for all the high entertainment thou hast shown me this day, and I forgive thee, cook. The fine foods thou hast set before me truly amend for the buffeting thou gave me. Now, bold Robin Hood, may I have my horse?" Robin turned to Will Stutely and said, "Fetch the sheriff's horse, and help him find his way upon the road to Nottingham." The fires burned low, and Robin raised his glass, saying, "Let us give 3 cheers for the sheriff, 1 for his silver plates, 1 for his cook, and 1 for his 300 gold coins." While all stood about and cheered heartily, the sheriff's heart sank, for above all he had wished to leave with his money. When Robin had the sheriff's purse in his hand and the coins were clinking into tall piles, he cried, "Another cheer for our good sheriff, for he is truly a generous fellow." The cheer echoed through the greenwood as the sheriff clenched his fist in anger. "And now," said Robin, "fare thee well, honored guests. Go home to thy great house and thy soft bed. Take with thee thy silver plates, for we are not used to such finery in our simple life." So once more the blindfold was placed over the sheriff's eyes, and as he was led out of Sherwood Forest, he rued the day he had first heard of Robin Hood. Listening to the clank of his silver plates with each step his horse traveled, the sheriff plotted how he would get sweet revenge. The end.